welcome everybody to our panel, Learning Differences, Learner Variability, How Technology Can Advance Opportunities for Each Learner, including students with learning disabilities. I'm Barbara Pape. I am the Senior Director of the Learner Variability Project at Digital Promise and moderator for today's conversation with amazing panelists who are so much fun and also so informative at the same time. I talk a lot with my hands. I'm going to try to not do that anymore and keep it right here. You can bump me if I don't. So we're going to bring to the table here, what we all bring to the table are different perspectives on how to create inclusive environments that understand and address the learner variability found in each student, and on how we can and can't do this through EdTech. We're going to dive right in by introducing ourselves, define inclusivity, and share how it informs our work. So, DM, can you kick us off?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Dieumerci Christel, or DM for short. And for me, inclusivity means that ensuring every student, no matter their circumstances, their backgrounds, their identities, their interests, are thriving in our education system. To me, this inclusivity, especially, it really ties into belonging. And for me, belonging comes in, I am a child of no nation. I was born and raised in a refugee camp in Tanzania. As a Congolese person living in a Tanzanian refugee camp, obviously I didn't belong. Coming to America here also as my next move, thinking like, okay, this is gonna be the final destination where I was gonna belong, and be in a school where, you know, I felt like I belonged. And for most of the time, I wasn't feeling that. And so I am on a mission, not only to replace bias with data because of how teachers saw me, but to be able to allow every student to have the opportunity to be seen and heard in their educational environments, so we can design experiences where students are actually thriving, and not just students who are usually have access, but especially those students who don't have access like me.
Who wants to pick it up?
Hi, I'm Jamie Reffell. I'm head of product and design at Clever. Clever powers digital learning for about 75% of K-12 schools. When I think about inclusivity, I love that you use the word access. That's a really big important thing for us at Clever, just making sure fundamentally that each and every student has access to the full suite of educational technology, because if they do not have access, then you've lost right at the start line. Never mind all the other difficult things that come after that. And so there's a lot of different axes that we think about. There's a lot of things that I think about personally. I'm also a parent. I have kids in San Francisco schools. And so I think about their experiences dealing with technology every day, their friends, their cohorts, folks who struggle, folks who have ease. But I really come back to that vision of making sure that every student can get the best possible benefit out of educational technology, as well as mitigating some of the downsides, which we'll also talk about.
That's great. I'm Lindsay Jones. I am the CEO of CAST, and we invented something called the Universal Design for Learning Framework, which is used around the world to help create inclusive experiences. And inclusion, to me, I want to pick up on the word belonging, because CAST's history started with creating environments for individuals with significant and cognitive and physical disabilities. And belonging is such a critical part of how we view our world and our lives. And I think we can have laws that bring us in, that bring us all together. But one of the things technology can do is, if everybody's using technology to do different things, then I don't stand out. Mm-hmm. I don't feel different and excluded, or I feel like I belong. So I just think inclusivity, that's a big part of it for us as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Craig Narveson. I'm with Kahoot. I'm curious how many of you out there are K-12 teachers? Okay, I'm guessing maybe some of you have used Kahoot. I head up partnerships at Kahoot. I've been with the company for 7.5 years. And DM, I'm also kind of a person without a land. I'm an American living at Kahoot headquarters in Oslo, Norway. So I invite you all to come visit. But inclusivity is one of the 3 core values at Kahoot. We are playful, we are curious, and we are inclusive. We believe that diversity is an asset that should be an enabler for learning. We want to reduce barriers to education, and that in my position in partnerships, I have a unique perspective working with our product teams, external partners, and also our internal business owners in the different audience sectors that we have, which is at home, at school, at work. So a little bit different from the rest of the panelists today, but it means a lot to Kahoot, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a through line on belonging. And I recently was fortunate enough to attend a UNESCO summit in Paris on inclusion, right? And this was a global gathering. There was a professor from Italy, I have to look at her name here, Dr. Simona Alessa, and she made such an interesting comment. She said, belonging is an outcome of inclusion rather than inclusion itself. It all starts with inclusion. If we can figure out how do we make sure that all students are included and not to be embarrassed by, oh, they're the only ones with accommodations. They're the only ones with the open computer in the class. If we can make this a common occurrence for everyone, that's what can lead to belonging. But I also want to define, because part of this conversation is about learner variability, and you won't be surprised I work at the Learner Variability Project, so I'm going to take a stab at defining learner variability here today. Let's see if I don't know if I have any digital promise people in the crowd. Tell me if I do. There she is. Christine, is that you? I don't have my glasses on. Okay, tell me if I'm doing okay on this. Or Christine, yeah. So learner variability, it's based on, part of it is based on Todd Rose's research, but also his book, The End of Average. I don't know if anybody's read it. Fabulous book. It's a complex terms and very simple language. You can read it on a beach and get a whole lot out of it. It changes your perspective, right? And our learner variability is also based, on research, but also on, particularly on Mary Helen Immerdino Yang's work at USC on the connection of emotion to learning. But learner variability for us is the recognition that each student has a unique set of strengths and challenges across a whole child framework that are interconnected and vary according to context. So from that, we developed a tool, an EdWeb tool called the Learner Variability Navigator. Has anybody seen it in here or used it? Or yeah, everybody up here has, but yeah, email me later and I would be glad to give a demonstration because we don't have access to the computer here. But basically, the researchers we gathered a group of researchers, pre-K, who have expertise in pre-K through 12 in literacy and math, and we did a recent one called Portrait of a Learner. These are 21st century skills. And these researchers, they developed factors that they said matter for learning across a whole child framework. That isn't just content, because that's how we tend to think. It's also the factors that matter in cognition. Those are things like working memory, attention, right? And social emotional learning is another column in that whole child framework. Social emotional, we've included factors there on, are you working under stereotype threat as a student? If you have a learning disability and you're in the highest math class, do you feel pressure, that you have to perform for your whole group, right? Everyone because if you mess up as someone labeled with a learning disability, is that going to crush the spirits of anyone coming after you? So, and SEL also includes building relationships and belonging. How about that? We have a factor on belonging. And the other column is student background. Are you living in adverse conditions? Do you get enough sleep? Is your hearing impacted? And primary language, we see primary language as a benefit, not a challenge, but we need to know that if your primary language is not English, is it dyslexia, or is it that you have a barrier in the language front? And there's all kinds of things to do there. So the line from the paper that I wrote, and I'm glad to, there's a link on some of these cards, yeah. The line that really resonates is when you understand learner variability, you see a design challenge, not a student problem. And that's the mindset shift we're all trying to work on here from different perspectives. Let me just look at the time. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on. So what I want to talk about now is how do you see learner variability and how does it impact your work? And Lindsay at CAST is going to kick this one off.
Thank you, Barbara.
Sure.
And we love the Learner Variability
Yeah,
Navigator,
and we love
just
that.
to say. So the way we see variability at CAST is that variability is the norm. Variability is the norm, and yet we don't design our systems for it. And I think actually when you say that to teachers, it's a tall challenge to think, how do I customize for all of the different, if variability is the norm, how do I reach all of the different brains, right? Neuroscience tells us our brains are as different as our fingerprints. But what Universal Design for Learning tries to do is it's a design thinking framework that helps you create either a learning experience, a product, a curriculum, all of it in a way that's going to reach learners based on what we do know about the three networks, learning networks in the brain. And so it's helping. It's meant to help, to say, hey, there are barriers in your curriculum. There are barriers to people that you may not know are there. And if you can reduce those barriers, if you can use this to say, if I know everybody, if I'm already designing with the assumption that everyone's different and I'm going to have to reach them in different ways, so that's where I start, you're going to have much better access to everybody already. You may still need to customize, which you can do with lots of things, but it's meant to kind of give you that framework of variability is the norm. If you know that going in, you can design in a way that can empower more students and learners.
I'm just going to jump in. You have such tremendous brain power and research, but one thing that on the Kahoot side we have leveraged is a lot of your thinking. And just last month, Kahoot published a paper on the importance of inclusivity in learning design for game-based learning. So I'd encourage you to do a little Googling if you want to have trouble finding that, let me know. But it was developed by our learning design team based on a lot of the concepts from CAST. So thank you.
Awesome, yeah, and I'll go in. So I'm the founder of Enlightapp, by the way. I didn't get to say that a little bit earlier. So the way we're working with the learner variability framework is that we, especially after you heard, like students' backgrounds, their experiences, their relationships, their interests, and all, like, there's so many things that a teacher has to put in their working memory to remember every week and make that that class feel. And by the way, it's not just student variability, it's classroom variability too, by the way, because every classroom, it's its own culture. So for as an educator, you're not just like trying to personalize it for a student, you're also trying to personalize it for the class and for the eight other classes that you have. And so what I am really, really passionate about is that, the learner variability framework, the UDL, like there's so much research that has already been done to help teachers find strategies. So what Enlightapp does is that we build student profiles that are dynamic so teachers can get to know all these things about their interests, their students' passions. We aggregate that on a student level and classroom levels. So you see, well, in my class, there's a bunch of kids that love anime because anime is also a culture inside that. So how do I use the anime culture to be able to engage my students in this classroom? And a different class might have kids that love, I don't know, AI, right? So, okay, maybe I should bring in ChatGPT more in this class and start incorporating some of that, right? So the way Enlightapp works is that we take research questions that usually are sitting on professors' like desks collecting dust, and then research that a lot of teachers have a really hard time finding in time, which is a huge problem, and we send that directly to their inbox. So we can do a quick assessment with 4 questions, and then send teachers research-backed strategies in time for them to make a difference that week.
I'll jump in, and I think we had a shout out for how many K-12 teachers were in the room. I'm actually curious, how many folks who are building software are in the room? Raise your hand, software builders. Okay, so this part is for you. I loved hearing all of the kind of direct design for the student and for learner variability. A lot of what we do at Clever, we do a little bit of stuff directly for the students, but a lot of what we do is the infrastructure. We're helping you all who are building software build better software. And so when I think about your ability as creators who are creating learning experiences, some of what you need is to understand the variability of your students, your classes, your teachers, your districts, all of those different units. And down in the weeds, that means data, that means APIs, that means having access to all of those things so that you can craft the right experience, the right learning experience for each and every student. And so for those folks in the room who have to operate at that level and are thinking behind the scenes, be thinking about what data about students you need to have access to, whether coming from the school or from themselves directly, and how you're gonna create things. And then, the minute that you think about that data, I do have to say you also have a very grave responsibility to protect that data. The minute that you start ingesting and thinking about all the different ways in which a student can be different, you then have a responsibility to make sure that that data cannot be used for harm. So there's a little bit of a yin and a yang there, but that's a little piece of how we think about it at Clever from that variability perspective.
And I'm just going to mention one more thing on the Kahoot side. Obviously, there are a number of ways you can leverage Kahoot as a platform. You can create content of your own, and you can also present that content in a live session, which was actually the original kind of scenario that Kahoot was designed for, to bring that student from the back of the classroom to the front of the classroom. So it was all around bringing the classroom together and learning from each other as well in that process. But you could also send Kahoots home as assignments. So if you want, or if you think your class is better kind of on their own, but still having some type of interaction. And then some classrooms don't want the competitive aspect. They don't want points associated. So it's important that our product allows for educators in particular to remove the points layer if they're concerned about overt competition that's not appropriate for the learners. So I think within the products themselves, there should be flexibility to cater all types of audiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also agree, here with Jamie's point about, especially when you're, well, any student, but when you're working with students with learning differences, this is an incredibly vulnerable population. And so for EdTech products to protect their privacy, because you think you're taking their names away, but if you said something like, oh, this is a student in Montgomery County who just won the Maryland State Piano Competition, that would be my daughter. I mean, because how many people have have done that, right? And she has dyslexia, so does my son. So, that pride, and the other thing I've learned along the way, and even with my two children, some people reveal, and they even think it's a superpower, and that's great. Other people don't reveal, and we need to really very much appreciate that and respect whatever somebody's choice is in that matter. But now here's another, so we want to talk now a little bit about accessible design and classroom practice. And this applies to both teachers in the classroom and also EdTech product developers, right? Through this aspect of learner variability. We did some national surveys a few years back and found at very high percentages the American public school teachers and public school parents do not feel that teachers raise your hand if you agree, do not have the time, the support, nor professional learning to customize instruction based on the principles of learner variability. Our job is to try to figure out how to make that easier for you. LVN is one option for that because it also shows connections among factors. Just very quickly, if you have a student who presents with low working memory, working memory is not working, and it sometimes doesn't work for me, right? In the morning, right? If you hover over our factor of working memory, you'll see the other factors that connect. For example, phonological awareness connects. That could indicate dyslexia. And you might want to, certainly you should try to get an assessment. But it also, sleep also is is a connection with working memory. And because you've built relationships with your students and you have a sense of belonging, you've created as best you can in your classroom, this sixth grader has an amazing mom, single mom, works the night shift, and the sixth grader has to get siblings up and out in the morning, and they come to school tired first thing in the morning, like any of us with parents. Anybody here want to agree to that? I mean, when you have to hustle those young kids out, it's exhausting. Working memory might be shot. They might not need to bump up on the MTSS, on the tiers, right? You might just need to know that and maybe not push the questions first thing or give another activity. That's how you can customize it using LVN. And then EdTech comes in and can really, we're going to hear from the people who do the EdTech too, can really help with that time element, right? And so, Craig, I'd like you to kick off this conversation about how can EdTech help? Tell us, how can EdTech help bring the understanding of learner variability and customize for kids with learning differences included?
Well, I'm not sure it is the silver bullet or the...
Probably isn't one, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The educator, I think, is critical, obviously, and understanding what the students' needs are and how the EdTech is used. But I will mention one thing. Recently, Kahoot participated in the LEGO Foundation's Play for All Accelerator, which was focused on neurodiverse learners. And obviously, Kahoot has some limitations, as all EdTech products do. But the challenge was to enable product innovation that allowed students to learn, but also express their knowledge in ways that were more aligned to how they think and how comfortable they are to express things. It was also really fascinating to be with the larger cohort of companies that participated and all the great thinking. I know Social Cipher is also here. If you haven't heard of them, you should definitely connect with Vanessa. I think she's somewhere. I was hoping she'd be here today. But in the process, we have developed on the Kahoot side a product called Kahoot Sparks, which is available in some of our Kahoot, what are called EDU plans, which effectively require consent, because in this presentation of knowledge retention or what has been learned by a student, there is some ability for the student to draw something, they want to write a poem, if they want to express it in another way, and obviously that's where we get into regulations about protecting PII. And I think this is going to be a continuing and evolving topic, because we do want to support in ways that can allow learners to express their knowledge in ways that aren't part of a locked product. And so we're trying to do this, but I do think at the end of the day, staying close to educators and staying close to our learners, and we do believe and have taken part in empathy interviews and being kind of co-creating with our educators and students. And as you mentioned, Jamie, educators are also neurodiverse. So the products themselves, it's not just about the student, it's also about the educators that are using the products. It has to work for everyone in that process.
Awesome. I'll actually go. And what I would love to start at is one thing that I saw very clearly during the pandemic is that the student-teacher relationship is one of the most, it is actually the most important relationship we have in education. And like, especially with, absenteeism, doubling, and we did research with, while competing for the Vital Prize, and we talked to more than 50 teachers, and we found out almost 70% of students are disengaged in their classes. And so speaking, from where Barbara was coming from, this student, maybe had 5 hours of sleep, and but you have hundreds of those, right? How do you now know which factors to use at what point? And for the student, it's so much. And that's what I'm really passionate about with Enlightapp, is to be able to diagnose some of that earlier, and then the teacher doesn't have to remember it because the students themselves are expressing it. And this is one of the things that we learned. For a long time, I, as a student, and this is how I build this tool, is from the student's perspective. You never ask. You just never ask us about what we think and what feedback we have in order to actually help improve these experiences. And so I think that's a very, very important thing that can also be brought up here, is actually including the student voices in that, but also how do you give them a space where they can feel safe to actually express themselves. And so for a very long time, people would tell me students won't tell you anything, DM, they won't answer these questions. But trust me, I almost cried last week after onboarding I think it was 100 kids in Brooklyn, of what they were saying, just by asking an open-ended question, asking, what problem in your community do you care about solving? Or what else do you want your teachers to know about you? And I'll give one answer. or from one of the students. So she basically said, she's like, when a teacher is being super serious and you're talking to me in a very serious way, you might start seeing me start giggling and laughing. Please don't be offended, because it's a coping mechanism for me. When I'm nervous, I just uncontrollably start like giggling and laughing. And so if you're an educator and you're like, hey, why don't you turn in your homework? And she's like giggling, right away, oh, that's disrespectful, but you don't actually know that this is her coping mechanism, right? And so by just asking open-ended questions to students, we're getting them to tell us more, and so they're so hungry to tell, and so I just think there should be a very easier way for teachers to be able to now get access to this information and then really protect it, so the privacy of those children are really being protected at the highest level.
I'll talk a little bit about just accessibility, and again, I'm going to speak a little bit more from that software perspective and those folks who are creating software. Don't ignore the fundamentals of accessibility. There are so many small ways that you can make it impossible for somebody to access your technology. If you have rendered your software in a way that means that it doesn't work with screen readers, then all the vision impaired kids are not going to be able to use it. If you have content that is only heard, even if it's a sound or something like that, and you don't have captions or some other way of getting it to folks who are hearing impaired. And so I think of this as kind of the floor. You always have to be remembering that those very basic but critical important things, many of which are about not messing up other assistive technology. You may not have to do an amazing job yourself making it the ideal thing for somebody who has a vision impairment. They have tooling, don't mess up their tooling. And so I just always starting at that foundational level. And then when you have done that, start having that research, doing the co-design, getting into the classrooms, a variety of classrooms with a variety of students, and seeing what else you can do. And you may be surprised. You may be able to do much more than that fundamental piece. We learned a long time ago at Clever, we had built badges, which is a way of younger students accessing technology without having to type in passwords. And younger students were one of our original targets because they're not typing yet. That's pretty foundational. Very, very quickly we understood that in classrooms that had kids who either had cognitive or motor disabilities who were older, that also made the act of entering a password really hard, they needed this technology as well, and this allowed them to do something. And so really watching for those opportunities to take even small aspects of what you're creating and elevate them for different communities or different learners, I think is just something that we always go back to and try to do as much as we can.
Yeah, I want to plus 1 million to that. Thank you. And just say that, it's so amazing to be around so much tech, so much incredible innovation, and so much of it that is inaccessible. When it's like, just build it in. It needs to just be born accessible. We have the ability to do it. And I think part of what you realize is exactly what you just said. We're all using that, right? There might be someone in here who is hard of hearing. My own mother was deaf. She needed captions, right? I don't need them, and I use them all the time. I don't need them for hearing. You may be looking at them right now. We all use them. They've made all of our lives better, right? So I think when you design for the margins and you see that, you're going to create so much more market share for yourself as you do it. So that's one thing I want to say. And I will just say, CAST has a product certification for Universal Design for Learning that has accessibility as its foundation. And that's because we had a lot of educators basically tell us, boy, we see all these products, we don't know, right? We're overwhelmed. And so this is a way to kind of help provide some sense of, it's on digital promises, marketplace, micro-credential, and
It's under certification.
it's under certifications, forgive me.
It's okay.
But it's been a wonderful process to work with different developers and show them, like, you can open your product to so many people, and even people who don't think they want that feature, that you're designing something that can be really useful. So, yeah, so it's a great, thank you.
Just on the product certification that Lindsay's talking about, and we have a whole stack on product certification on learner variability. It's the cool thing about it, it's research-based, and it really is research-based. I hope you all go and look in, for example, the Learner Variability Navigator. We include all of the references that we use to create these factors of learning. And it's also free, by the way, and open source. But we include the reference list there. You could write a dissertation, I'm starting to do that, or you can do a grant proposal on all of the citations that are there. So, do go and look at our product certification and the one we did with UDL, which is great. So the next question we have here, we've talked about whole child, and we went through what the framework is: content, cognition, SEL, social emotional learning, and student background. Let's dig a little bit deep in social and emotional learning, and also that concept of belonging, right? Can EdTech really help develop social and emotional learning? Can EdTech really help teachers create a sense of belonging? And Jamie's going to start with this one. The hard question.
Yeah, this is a hard one.
We gave it to her.
And I also think it's interesting because it's I feel like more of the practitioner than the expert in some ways in terms of not doing some of these studies. But here's my take, and there's a strong yes, and then there's a caution. Mm-hmm. The strong yes is the variety of software tools and educational experiences that just the creative power of software brings into the world, absolutely 100% is creating opportunities for students and teachers that would not otherwise exist. We've talked about dyslexia a couple times, and I think in particular, last year I was at a kind of a panel like this, but I was in the audience learning, and the absolute smartest, most well-prepared, well-spoken panelist up there was an 8th grader. She was freaking phenomenal. And she was an 8th grader with dyslexia, and she talked in incredible detail about not just how different specific tools had helped her with her dyslexia, but which ones worked well, which ones didn't work well. Some of the software makers were in the audience. Which ones had worked at different points in her education. Like, oh, that was great when I was a little kid, but now I use something different. And just that power of, like, she had this amazing understanding of the tools that were available to her through it so that she could pursue her own education. I was a hero. This young lady was amazing. So that's the strong yes, because when I widen my lens and I look at all of the different folks at a conference like this who are building software, either general software for everybody, but in many cases, building software with particular audiences in mind, and I love that, like that ability to hone in and say, we're building something for you, and we're gonna make it work for you, and then someone else is gonna build it for you. I think that's why I have such a strong yes. My caution is that it is very, very easy for creators of software to also do harm to inclusion and a sense of belonging. I also teach design, and I give a standard example that's very important in software, and it happens all the time: names. If you have a name that the software doesn't understand how to handle, maybe the software thinks that everybody has 2 or 3 names, not one. Maybe software doesn't understand that a number can be part of your name. Maybe the software doesn't understand the characters in your name because it's thinking from a US context. Imagine seeing, as a young person, your name not even be able to render. This is a real example. It actually happened to an adult on my team at work. HR software, of all things, couldn't render some characters used in Polish. And so you're staring at your name, and they can't even get the name right. And so if you imagine that in a classroom with a young student, how hard, how important is that? So I use name as an example because it's one that always comes up. You can think about illustrations, you can think about all sorts of other things. And in today's environment, this is getting tougher. We rolled out a feature not too long ago about names where we were giving students the ability to select their own name. Maybe the student system had their old name and they have a preferred name for whatever reason, a nickname, they're transgender, there are other reasons. We rolled that out, and we're very happy with it. This is something we're like, hey, we have this tiny moment where a student can see themselves. Well, in today's environment in certain states, that information could actually be used potentially to forcibly out someone. We turned that feature off. It's one of the harder decisions that we've made, and it was the right decision because I would rather not do harm. But I think that's just the caution of, like, as the environment out there changes, when you think about what's happening in the US, but also in other countries, be very cautious because you want to do good, you want to create wonderful experiences. Do take a moment to think about the ways in which something could be used against a student or a teacher or a family, and make sure you're protecting against those as well.
I can jump in from a completely different angle, and it's from the partnerships side. Big surprise. For the software developers out there, if your product isn't inherently kind of purpose-built for SEL, topic at hand, maybe you could partner with a third party that has content or experiences that could be somehow integrated or bolted on. One thing at Kahoot, which is my kind of passion area, is meeting with prospective partners every single week. And oftentimes there isn't a fit, but when there is a fit, you know it. And one example in the SEL area is with Microsoft Reflect. And there is a collection of free Kahoots. I think it's over 50 Kahoots that are available for educators and students to play free forever, which is a proposition for Kahoot around inclusive design. We don't have to pay for it if you're a student or a teacher. But within this collection, if you're familiar with Microsoft Reflect, it's basically content that enables on Kahoot a classroom to express how they're feeling as individuals. And for an educator in that real time to see what the students are feeling about different topics. And so it's an enabler. And I think it's maybe the part that I feel closest to, because I'm enabling this fantastic content has now another way of getting into the classroom. So think about that also from a product design perspective, how you can have others join your mission in areas that you might have not thought of in the initial design phase.
Awesome. And I love that. And I want to second something and maybe throw a little curveball real quick. So as a student, and sometimes it's mostly how I look at it, I like, especially my senior year of high school and college, I would take those, emotional check-in surveys of, are you sad? 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 Every day asking me 5 different emojis. And I've always wondered, like, what's happening when my teacher is just seeing, like, yeah, they're getting sadder and sadder and sadder, or
Hopefully something.
or happier and happier and happier. So I've always wondered, and this is why I love, like, UDL, Learner Variability Framework, because it's not just about them feeling sad. It's about their interests, their passions. Who are they coming in? And so what I want to challenge EdTech here is like we should move beyond just like, how are you feeling today? Mm-hmm. Although that is important, but I feel like we need to also give teachers data of like how to make them feel better and not just telling them that they're getting sadder or happier every day.
Yeah, that is great. I will just say quickly that one of the major parts of the UDL framework is based on the affective networks in the brain, right? And it's engagement. And so it may not be, but that's what you're saying, right? And I think it's why Kahoot has found those partnerships that work well. And it is about building a product that it brings joy and delight to learning. And when we see chronic absenteeism, and we have all these reasons that we know that kids are disengaged, I think thinking about that is a major network in all of our brains, and that we are going to use it to learn. And so if you're not designing with that in mind, your product isn't going to be as well received.
We are running out of time, so I'm going to do the final question very quickly, so just give me a couple of words, and I'll start off as a model for this, which is hard for me to do. And we want to say, what do school leaders need to know to effectively use technology to support teachers and their students, in this case with learning disabilities? And I'm going to say, co-design with teachers. Bring your teachers to the table right away. Hear what they have to say. And as a matter of fact, let's hear from the students as well. We all have examples, whether they're personal or professional, of student voice, and you'll learn so much about what actually needs to be in that product. And if you bring the teachers to the table and the students to the table, why not bring the parents if you can? So I'm going to just go down the row here, if that's okay.
All right, just echoing what I said before, but from the school leader perspective, first make sure that the technology you're evaluating is not just going to be completely inaccessible by some of the core folks that you're trying to serve, and then have that deeper conversation that Barbara's talking about, where you're like, okay, now what do we need on top of that? Now that we know that it actually just works, what are the specific needs in our community, and how can we get the right software? Maybe it's not something bought for everybody. Maybe we have different tools available for different groups. How are we going to manage that?
I'll just say, I think teachers are very stressed. They got a lot of work. There aren't enough of them. And so be kind to them, and like respect them, and bring your technology in and show them how it can make what they're trying to accomplish better.
Awesome. Yeah. What I would say is, and really honestly seconding what Barbara said, co-design. Co-design with teachers, co-design with students, co-design with community. You know, I believe like the culture doesn't just end in the classroom. It's the whole community that you as a school leader are serving. And that culture changes every year. You might get, you know, we moved, I think it was like almost 50 like Congolese families moved together to like North Dakota, right? Now that changes completely. So how do you start catering to that? So, you know, that means including them in those co-designing spaces.
I would say, going back to the design principles, make sure it's engaging, make sure it can be measured, and make sure that it's based on moving a learner in a pathway that's positive.
I can't think, we have 1 minute. Is there one question? One question. Go ahead.
So, and I don't know if there's really a software solution to this, but one of the things that I've noticed about learning disabilities over the years, my husband has dyslexia, my brother has dyslexia. My brother went through resource room, I'm old, so this is going back to
Yeah.
where he would be pulled out of the classroom
Yep.
and there was stigma attached to that.
Yes.
Like he was embarrassed about it. My husband, on the other hand, was like, screw that, I'm not doing it. And so he basically went through his whole school career just struggling. And so both of them ended up in these very different paths, but both with stigma attached to
Yeah,
their
yeah,
disability.
yeah.
Is there something that you're seeing or that you could work into this kind of design that would make students, and I think that all comes back to belonging,
Yeah.
right?
And empathy.
Not feeling alone in that.
You know what our hypothesis is if we taught students and adults that we all have learner variability, we all have strengths and challenges, whether you have dyslexia, whether you are lived in a refugee camp, whoever you are, right? That we all have strengths and challenges, we all understand our own learner variability, but then realize that everyone else has it. The hypothesis is that that's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I can tell you this, though. So decades ago, I got a master's at Harvard in reading and literacy and have a paper on just what that, labeling. And so there's the plus side of labeling is you get services. The downside is you have stigma. And that, unfortunately, after decades, is still facing us. And Lindsay and I talk about that a lot. Anybody else on that topic?
Yes, actually, I want to add on to that. So I was the student also being pulled out sometimes of my classroom, but and that was because I was an ELL student, and like my math was pretty on par with American kids, even though we didn't have school for 2 years in refugee camps. So I would get pulled out of the classroom. But what I'm like really honestly like noticing also is that like when I did get pulled out of that classroom, I did feel different. I did feel like, wow, why me and not everybody else? But I really love what you said about like finding your strength.
Yeah.
What I didn't really notice in that moment is that I already spoke 5 different languages.
Yeah.
I already spoke 5 different languages, and I never really recognized it in myself, right? But I'm like, oh man, I don't know English. I'm still learning English. Okay, so I felt different, but so I really love that. Recognizing your strength and teaching.
I'm just going to, we also created by teachers for teachers a template to how do you create strength-based whole child IEPs. So strengths aren't only in the content area, but also in let's say social emotional learning. I have a sixth grader who has dyslexia but is great at building relationships with peers. What do I do? If you look on LVN, the strategies would be recorded books, right? And then collaborative writing in a book club. Have them use UDL and have them read, everybody can read, a recorded book, and then join a book club to chat. But go ahead, I think
I'll just, part of your answer was I don't know if software can help, and I would give one of my cautious yeses. I don't think it's a silver bullet, but we heard just very bluntly, like, are you being pulled out of the room or not? And I think software can sometimes give you some answers that are a little bit in the middle. You know, you've got a bunch of kids on Chromebooks, they're all using different software. They don't need to know that maybe what you're looking at for this module is not exactly the same as what the person next to you is looking at. So there's a little bit of finessing you can do from a teacher's perspective. Part of my caution is often you're putting a lot of burden on the teacher to manage that differentiation and to manage that sort of setup. So that can have some downsides as well. But I do think that there's some finessing that we can do directly on that like pull out of the room kind of dynamic and that labeling.
And I am actually really hopeful that more educators can expose the way that different learners absorb knowledge and express it, because I think if I was in a classroom where someone expresses their knowledge in a poem or wrote a song to express their knowledge of something that they learned in math, I would be very curious to understand how their brain works. And I'd want to learn more. So I'm very hopeful because neurodiversity is not going away.
Oh, no.
And
No.
it's not just in the classroom. It's
Yeah,
right here.
I'll just say quickly,
on the stage.
why do we want a system? Like, the system we have right now, you're 30 kids in a room, 5 of you have disabilities, you go down the hall with Mrs. Jones. 10 of you are multilingual, you go down the hall with Mr. Alfonso. The trauma, you're with Counselor Joe. Who is left, right? What are we, and why do we pay for all these duplicate systems? It has stigma and emotional damage that we see off the charts for individuals who are identified with learning disabilities, that we know from data their school is harming them. And we can change that because we created the system.
Yeah.
We own it. So, like, let's change it.
Can we take another question? No? Way over. No. Okay, we're way over. I'm so sorry.